This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Dialogue. Today I'm talking to the former President of Slovenia, His Excellency Danilo Türk, about his new book, A World Transformed, Reflections on the International System, China and Global Development. With established and rising powers often at odds, are we heading towards order or chaos? How do the major players like China, Europe and the United States fit into the rapidly changing multipolar world? It's an honor and a pleasure to have President Turk to share his thoughts. That's our topic. I'm Zhou Yue. Mr. President, it's an honor to have you on the show. First, congratulations on your new book. This book is A World Transformed, Reflections on International System, China and Global Development. I know it's talking about the changing world we live in. So what is your basic arguments about the transformation of the world as we see it?
Well, first, thank you for having me on this show. Well, the basic idea is this. In order to understand our transformation properly, we have to look at it from a historical perspective and take a sufficiently long historic view of the transformations we are experiencing. This transformation is deep. It is not only technological, as is sometimes claimed, but it is intensely political. And that means that the global political balance is changing. And the question then is, how does one ensure that this change doesn't lead to chaotic circumstances? And the answer is multilateral cooperation. So in short, I would say we have to look at current changes through a political lens with a historical perspective and understand that multilateral cooperation is the only way forward. We don't live in a world of a science fiction. The world is not a science fiction, and technological change does not automatically translate into a new reality of the world. It requires political cooperation and, above all, multilateral cooperation.
What do you think is the main drivers of those changes? Is it geopolitics? Is it globalization? Is it nationalism? Is it global commerce? What is the major factor?
Well, all these factors have a role, but I would like to say that the political maturity of leaders would require to understand that no single factor is dominant. So if we take a look at globalization, obviously globalization is there, but globalization has been taking place in various forms for centuries. It's not a new phenomenon. The important thing is to understand its current shape and guide it in a way which would be good for everybody. Now, globalization, 200 years ago took place in the form of colonial domination. Well, that's long over. And the countries that were exposed to this sort of predatory politics of the northern hemisphere towards the southern hemisphere of the world, or from the west towards the east, now live in a very different type of a situation where the global south and the global east has become very powerful. And the new balance is already there, and it has to be recognized and the international cooperation shaped accordingly. It would be a mistake to take one single factor or one single power as decisive. Everybody has to cooperate.
Since you already mentioned globalization, I want to talk about one big beneficiary of this process. That is obviously China. And you devoted a large parts of your books to talks on China. But my question is, first of all, as a former Slovenian politician, why were you interested in China in the first place?
Well, look, everybody should be interested in China, but I had a rather special opportunity, I was working with the United Nations. I was Assistant Secretary General for Political Affairs with Kofi Annan, who was Secretary General in the years 1997 to 2007. So I was with him in every visit he made to China from the year 2000 to 2005. I met all Chinese leaders of that era and was in touch with many Chinese academic students and so forth. And subsequently, I have visited China many times as president on an official visit, but also as a scholar with universities and also in the framework of the Imperial Springs Forum, which is taking place every year in Guangdong province. So I had much communication with China, and I have seen the development and talked about it a lot. Now, it's not difficult to see how important China has been. Just one example. I remember a meeting Kofi Annan had with the Chinese leaders in the year 2000, when he was told, look, the United Nations has produced what you call the global Millennium Development Goals, a broad global framework for development in the beginning of 21st century. They said, we in China will demonstrate that we follow all these requirements very carefully and that our 5-year plans will be adjusted to that. And as a result, the world will benefit. Now, this is precisely what happened between the year 2000 and 2015. The world has become very much aware of the importance of China's development for global development on poverty reduction, creating production that is available to many around the world, and more recently becoming a very important, globally important market. So in short, this is what, these are the main considerations.
This is very interesting. So probably not a lot of people heard about this. China not only is a subscriber to the Millennium Development Goal, but also an enforcer of that plan. But not all people in the world look at China's growth as a positive thing. Why do you think is the reason for that?
Well, I think that, of course, this positive development has created a new balance globally. And obviously, for the established powers, this represents a challenge. It's a not new challenge. That kind of things have happened in the past when an established power, for example, the United States today, has to understand that it can lead in the future, it can be a leader in the future, but it cannot dominate in the future. You see, how does an established power continue its leading role without being a dominating power anymore? That's the challenge. It's not an entirely new challenge. If you read Henry Kissinger, you will see that he sees the world in 1970s in similar light, leading by example, not by domination. Well, that's a big challenge for established powers. And for a rising power like China, the question is, how does one ensure a rightful place among global powers? First, by showing its own example, and then also demonstrating patience. Because, of course, this kind of things require a great deal of patience and careful design of policies, but in a determined way. Slowly, not necessarily very slowly, but with determination and pace that is appropriate.
But that's an unprecedented thing for both countries, the United States and China, because over the past 150 years, the United States has been enjoying the dominant role in the world. Probably it is unimaginable for many Americans to imagine leading the world without dominating it, especially when seeing China coming on so strong. And I think that is a fundamental problem for the United States.
Well, I fully agree with you. Of course, this is a problem, but it's not an insurmountable problem, because the United States has learned in the past that it will be, let us put this in a terminology by the United States, an indispensable nation. I'm sure you are familiar with this term, indispensable nation, which was coined by the Madeleine Albright, who was Secretary of State of the United States some 20 years ago.
Indispensable, exceptional.
Yeah, no, well, these are two different concepts. Now, I think that there's nothing wrong with being indispensable, but there are others who are also indispensable. I mean, China is indispensable today. In every problem around the world, you have to consult with China. You have to consult with Russia as well, and in many places also the European Union or other powers. So indispensability does not mean unipolar world. Indispensability means, yes, there are several powers who are indispensable, and United States have to learn this indispensability as something that takes place within a collective. And that's new, and that has to be learned. Now, I would warn against the use of the word exceptionalism, because United States exceptionalism has demonstrated to be a fairly dangerous concept. Because it suggests that only the United States has all the truth in its possession and all the solution in its reach. It is not like that.
But don't you think there is no other way that Americans can think of themselves rather than being exceptional? Because whatever they say and whatever they do to the rest of the world, they seem to think they are in a position of superiority.
Yeah, well, I think that right now, United States needs a lot of introspection, more than anything else. And I think that the whole experience with the latest presidential elections have really demonstrated how necessary that introspection will be for the future. I mean, United States is special. I lived in the United States for 13 years. I like much that I have experienced in the United States. You know, it's a wonderful country, but it should not exaggerate with the idea of exceptionalism. You know, you can say, all right, we are exceptional, but, you know, others are also in certain ways exceptional. China is exceptional given the quick pace within which it has overcome poverty in a country which is really very large in every sense, including in particular with the number of people that were lifted from poverty, hundreds of millions. Now that's exceptional. And if you understand exceptionalism of yourself as something that respects the exceptionalism of others, well, then of course that's a step forward. But exceptionalism per se can be a very dangerous concept, which can lead to wrong conclusions, wrong policies, and of course complications at the international level.
And one possibly wrong direction is that the U.S. is having a strong urge to decouple with China economically and technologically. And as a result, China has come up with what we call dual circulation strategy last year. It focuses largely on domestic market, domestic technologies, because we are worried about being cut off from American technology and services. Where do you think this is going?
Well, look, my understanding of this is that this dual circulation concept was in the making for a long time, really. It's not an instantaneous, the way I see it, this is not an instantaneous reaction to the current complications between China and United States. I visited China officially as President of Slovenia back in 2008, and I was studying the economic trends of that time. It was already clear that China has reached a stage of development in which it would have to rely much more on its own market, and where the growth rates will not be as high as they were in the preceding decade. So, and then of course, subsequent figures continuously confirm that. I mean, China has been gradually much less dependent on its export. It of course is a huge export economy, and that remains important. But whereas export dependence used to be around 35%, some 15 years ago or so, it is now below 20%. So the export dependence has gone down, and China has to develop its internal market much further. for the benefit of its own people, and also, very importantly, to offer the market opportunities to foreign partners who will have to understand that China is no longer only the factory of the world, but also the market of the world.
Yeah.
So we are going through a very important transition where dual circulation economy is a natural expression of development of China. We have to understand that and see how best to take benefit, to take advantage of this new development for everybody. I mean, everybody can gain.
Okay, let's talk about the challenges faced by both Europe and China later on. We'll take a short break. So, Mr. President, let's talk about the challenges faced by Europe and China. Well, the 17+1 initiative that was launched in 2012 to expand cooperation between China and Central and Eastern Europe, but some CEE countries are not so satisfied, and also Western Europe have doubts about whether this cooperation will divide Europe in a way. What is your thoughts?
Well, I think that this cooperation is welcome and will have to continue one way or another. The 17 countries involved in the scheme of cooperation with China represent, I think, a little less than 10% of total Chinese investment in Europe. So this is a small part of Europe-China cooperation. The largest part of Chinese investment in Europe are in Britain, in Germany, France, Italy, the big countries of Europe. And it is, I think, quite natural for countries in Central and Eastern Europe, which are smaller and need more development in infrastructure, in technology, and in industrial production and so forth. So I think it's quite natural for them to look for a collective way of improving, of developing that cooperation further. I also think that everybody understands that the European standards on environmental protection, workers' rights, and other norms have to be respected. So I think that we have already a solid reason to cooperate, and the framework, at least as far as European Union countries are concerned, which should be quite adequate. What we need is more discussion within European Union, and I think that that's going to continue.
And there is another milestone development between China and Europe, is that both sides completed their negotiations on major investment deal at the end of last year. But the problem is European Parliament has not yet ratified the deal, and people expected political blowbacks from parliamentarians in Europe. So what do you make of the political considerations of Europeans' qualms about China's systems and the strong desire to have economic cooperation on the other hand?
Yeah, well, this is one of the problems that we discussed at the beginning, because I think that European political leaders will have to understand that closer cooperation with China is in the interest of Europe. And the comprehensive comprehensive agreement on investment is not, an instantaneous product. I mean, it has been negotiated for more than 7 years, I think almost 8 years. I have followed that negotiation in the past, and I have noticed that the main problems in negotiations were related to reciprocity and proper protection of intellectual property, state subsidies, and other economic factors. It is very good, and I have argued earlier last year that high-level leaders of both sides should get together and finalize the agreement. That was before it was obvious that the time for concluding the agreement has come. And I think the outcome is good. I also think that the elements such as ILO norms, conventions protecting labor are important and have to be respected and also put into practice. So I think that as a whole, this is a good agreement, which is not properly understood in the European political circles as yet. I think negotiators know what they have concluded, and the leaders who were involved in the final phase also understand that. But there are many other political actors in Europe which still have to to figure out the advantages of the agreement and the opportunities that it brings. And those opportunities are not only in the economic sense, but also by providing a legal platform that we can develop further and also, in a way, strengthen the concept of the rule of law.
Unlike the United States, there isn't geopolitical tensions between China and Europe, but there are issues that we see things differently. For example, on human rights, on the issue of Hong Kong. How can we set aside differences or try to narrow our differences and also agree on those things that we can?
Now, first on the differences between the approach of the United States and European Union. Well, I would say that, excuse me, obviously the European Union and the United States have similar views in many respects, but they are not identical. And we have to recognize each of us has a different perspective, slightly different types of interest. And in fact, the comprehensive agreement on investment can be used as an example and also as a model for future negotiations between China and United States relating to investments, relating to other economic cooperation. It can also serve for global arrangements which will have to be negotiated within the World Trade Organization. So that's one side. And I think that we still have a lot of work to do to develop this positive understanding of the opportunities that that agreement brought. Now, on the question of human rights, I think we need to be very attentive and figure out what creates the basis for productive discussion in the future on human rights. Now, my proposal here would be that we start by a concept that I think is important both for European Union, European countries and other countries, and China, and that is the rule of law. I think that a rule of law as a concept is actually older than human rights. If you look at the global history, it has millennia of history, both in China and in Europe. So rule of law is fundamental, but rule of law is also part of the whole body of human rights. So we have to figure out how to develop the basis of rule of law for the future, and that applies to all situations. You mentioned Hong Kong. Sure, I think we see the developments there. We understand that national security of Hong Kong is part of the whole principle of sovereignty of China. Hong Kong is part of sovereign territory of China, and national security is Chinese. And then there are rule of law aspects which can be discussed further. Hong Kong has a very interesting court system. The question of functioning of judiciary, in some cases involving foreign judges, is not new in Hong Kong. There are new questions that arise with regard to application of new laws in Hong Kong, and all that is very interesting and can be discussed. On the other hand, the developments in European Union are also interesting. We have a big discussion on the rule of law in Europe. Some European Union countries have been under special attention because of rule of law problems, and there is much to be explained in that regard also. Yeah. So I think we have a certain reservoir of themes which we can constructively and successfully deal with in the future, and gradually develop a better mutual understanding on human rights as a whole.
Yeah, it's interesting to talk about human rights issues in the context of rule of law. Thank you, Mr. President. I know that you are currently the president of the Club at Madrid. That's a forum of former heads of state and government. So what would you say to the current heads of state and government as you have gathered experience and learned your lessons in world affairs? What would you say to them?
Well, we actually have argued very strongly in favor of multilateral cooperation. Last year, in 2020, our main theme in our discussions in Club de Madrid was about multilateralism. And we produced set of recommendations called multilateralism that delivers. We emphasize the delivery aspect of multilateralism. Multilateralism is necessary.
It has
and
been
must
blamed
deliver.
for not delivering any substantial result over the past decades, right?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, we have no choice. I mean, we can experiment with nationalist approaches, we can engage in all kinds of other things, but eventually multilateral cooperation is the only way forward. Take a look, for example, at COVID-19. I mean, you know, right now we are in the middle of a kind of a race for vaccines, and there is a lot of expectations around what is called vaccine nationalism. But that doesn't lead us anywhere, because the virus is there. It's a global problem. It will have to be addressed globally. And if we believe that individual countries or regions can be made safe, that's a big mistake.
But that's
the virus
so prevalent and convenient now. Even Europe, recently the European Union has restricted the vaccines exporting to other parts of the world. This is very much in the minds of people.
No, I know, and that's a big problem. I think the countries that are manufacturing vaccines should come together and develop a global plan for vaccines. I don't think that, of course, in the early period, everybody thinks about its own population. I mean, every country has that priority in mind. I think in the coming months, we'll have to see more movement towards cooperation in vaccines. For example, the Russian vaccines, Sputnik 5, were greeted with suspicion at the beginning, but now there is more confidence, and there are many more countries outside Russia, outside Europe, that are benefiting from that. I don't know about Chinese vaccines. Some countries in the Middle East are already adjusting to that.
Yeah, and also in Southeast Asia and South America.
So I think that right now it would be very important to strengthen manufacturing of different vaccines which have been tested and proven successful, and make that global. Now, of course, this is not going to happen as a matter of weeks, but it can happen as a matter of 6 months or 1 year. So that's the task right now. And when we expect the group of G20 to meet later in the spring, or when we expect the meeting of the Davos Forum, the World Economic Forum in Singapore in May, well, I think that these people will have to have global cooperation in production and distribution of vaccines as a very important priority, because this is the challenge today, and it can be only addressed globally. I mean, the current arrangements that exist are understandable, but they are not sufficient. They are not adequate to solve the problem. So if we want to solve the problem, we have to establish a global system of cooperation for production and distribution of vaccines. There are certain beginnings there. There is COVAX, which United Nations and World Health Organizations have put together, but they are not properly financed, they are not properly supported yet. And maybe that's the platform upon which in the coming months, the world should come together and develop a comprehensive approach to production and distribution.
That's very important points for the leaders of the world right now. Thank you so much, Mr. President, for your insights. And you've been watching Dialogue.